Hello to everyone and welcome to our podcast about mixed couples. This is a special podcast because this is the first time that we do it here in CNews, so it's going to be an honor to share with you this topic and talk about it. And in order to do so, I have the honor to be with Daniel van den Pol. He's a psychologist here in CNews. Daniel is a multilingual therapist from the Netherlands. He considers himself a third culture kid with a hybrid between Dutch and Spanish cultures. He has traveled to 4 continents and loves to discover new places. Although he doesn't not travel as much now, he gets to know more and more of the world as he attends mainly mixed couples in couples therapy. So let's start from the beginning. Daniel, what are mixed couples?
Well, that's a very good question, and there are multiple ways in which we could not only answer that, but also think about what a mixed couple is. You could think about ethnicity, you could think about race, you can think about nationality, you can also think about even religion or language for that matter. Mm-hmm. But maybe an easy way to put it, and that's what also many authors embrace, is to simply focus on nationality.
And as now the world gets to be more globalized and people have more chances to travel and even to live in other countries, are mixed couples on the rise? Is this a new normal?
Well, although they are on the rise, I wouldn't say particularly it's a new normal, because actually we have had them since ancient history. Mm-hmm. And if you think about royal unions, that was actually also mixed couples altogether. Mm-hmm. But just to focus a little bit on some of the stats, and if you think about Spain specifically, we went from in 1998 from having over 1 million immigrants to then in 2019 being close to 7 million. So that's a very pronounced difference. And this is part of the statistics of the continuous census. Mm-hmm. But then also if we focus on the natural movement of the population, this stat indicates that only focusing on marriages, these have gone in 1988 from 4.5% to in 2008, 14.9%. So again, we see, and this is only marriages, we're not talking about legal unions, which would possibly show as a great number too. So in that sense, there are multiple ways. Actually, this has been collected in a very interesting study by the BBVA, which is the Spanish Bank Foundation. And it's actually a book, almost 500 pages long, talks about the management of intimacy in the digital current society. It really has some very interesting points on how we make for new couples, and it has a whole chapter actually focused on mixed couples. So I think that is revealing.
No, actually it is, and of course it's not something new, but as we can see, it's a tendency now, and we can see that it's increasing. So as something that is increasing, and we have more chances to meet a person meet a couple from another place, that we can become a mixed couple. What are the phases that a mixed couple face?
Well, we could actually say that very similarly to the ones that a non-mixed couple would face.
That's it. That's right.
But with additional difficulties and with also specific characteristics that we cannot just jump over or take as irrelevant. Mm-hmm. So I would like to suggest 3 phases, and you can actually compare them through multiple lenses. You can compare them through the lens of acculturation, how you get used to a new culture, mm-hmm. because a mixed couple will have to get used to either the culture of their partner, or if they come together to another country, they will have to also adapt to the culture that they move to. Mm-hmm. That's one way of looking at it. Another way is looking at different stages, as for example, imago therapy suggests, which mm-hmm. you go through one, which is like the falling in love phase. And this one, your chemistry is high in your body, you're very focused. It basically is described like as you cannot take the person off your mind, almost like an obsession with the other person. It just fills your time. You have this excitement, there is this novelty, there is this unknown, this mystery. And in the mystery, and trying to figure out that mystery, there can be a very strong sense of attraction. But once that phase fades off, then you need to go into another phase, which is the phase of really becoming attached to another person and choosing if you're going to actually go from what you could also understand culturally speaking, tourist mode, to actually saying, can I live with this, right? And if we think about tourist mode can actually say, oh, you know what? I love the food. I love the language. I love the different cultural habits, cultural norms. But there comes a moment where there is actually a clash with your own norms, with your own set of values. Mm-hmm. And usually culture is implicit, meaning you're not aware of it. For you, it's just normal. It's familiar. It's what you're used to. It actually becomes evident once it actually clashes with another culture, with that one of your partner, or if you are in a neutral place that is dissimilar culture to both for you, or a different country for that matter, then you will have to face the challenges that country poses for you. So nowadays in society, naming the relationship is already maybe a problem, like, am I going to commit? What are we going to call this? Well, imagine them for a mixed couple. The challenge is much higher. If you say we are together, what are the challenges that you're going to need to face then? Well, you'll have to deal with, can I live with these cultural differences? Mm-hmm. Can I adapt? Can I give up? With mixed couples, when it comes to making concessions, when it comes to reaching mutual agreements, there is a lot more at stake, and it's a lot more costly. So you'll possibly have to give up things if you choose to be in this couple dynamic. And the thing is, in this first phase of the falling in love, sometimes the only thing that a couple has in common is their mutual passion. So imagine once that mutual passion fades off, and you suddenly face with that what was attractive, new, and unknown becomes more known, and you're like, I might like this particular dish, but would I like it every day?
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe not. Wow, I love learning a new language. Yes, but I find it quite difficult to communicate. And once it comes to conflict, I much rather tell you off in my own known language, because that's something I see in therapy too. Yeah. Like sometimes there is a partner who is at disadvantage. I see people with different levels of English for that matter. Mm-hmm. And sometimes if they speak Spanish, they get the chance to say, I get the chance to say, hey, you know what? Why don't you just say it in the language that is easiest for you? Because maybe it just comes out smoother, and I can take whatever is most important from what you just said and tell the other partner.
That's it, because normally, or almost not normally, but maybe always, you are more comfortable in your own language, in your mother language. So that's why if you have a problem, you want to solve that problem in your mother language.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
That's completely understandable. But the problem is when the other person doesn't speak that language. So maybe you cannot express yourself as good as you would in your mother language.
Exactly. And if you think about even specific languages, that they have a specific tone to it. Mm-hmm. Maybe some are more enthusiastic, mm-hmm. others are more reserved. So even in speaking the language, you might find that the way that you express it is even mm-hmm. maybe inhibited to mm-hmm. what you would usually say in your own language.
Of course. So let's imagine that we have a mixed couple and they visit
yep.
Daniel in therapy, and you help them overcome and achieve all these goals, and they want to consolidate a family. How can they do it, and what are the challenges that they have for that?
Yes. So if we go back to these phases, right? So the mm-hmm. first one is falling in love. Mm-hmm. The other one is the one of compromise, mm-hmm. which also sometimes means a power struggle, mm-hmm. which is just like, hey, what am I going to give up, and what are you going to give up? Sometimes mixed couples also have like their own careers. It's like, which job is going to overtake maybe the other, right? I mean, it's hey, which one is more important? And you can take also cultural norms in terms of what a male is supposed to do or a female is supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, that also makes for an additional power struggle. I'm getting to your question. Mm-hmm. So once you get over that power struggle, mm-hmm. ideally, once you know, hey, we have reached mutual agreements in which we can make this work, and mm-hmm. instead of the couple dissolving mm-hmm. and breaking up, we actually get over it. And we know, hey, okay, we're going to make a commitment here, mm-hmm. a commitment that is culturally aware. Because if you're not culturally aware, then cultural differences will come on later and be an unpleasant visitor. Third, once you've been able to compromise, once you've been able to do that, so after the power struggle, you come to a more conscious, right? It's even how you work with culture. When you're faced with a culture shock, you first have tourist mode, then you got the person who's like, whoa, I am really missing home. I'm getting homesick. There are things that are really annoying from this culture, or I really feel alienated here. I don't feel like I belong. Once you've been able to get over that, in the acculturation process, you come to a third stage, which is an adaptation, assimilation even of the culture. So if you piece that together, if you've been able to make that step, and hopefully you have been able to make it, because if you get the kids into it, let's hope that it's not the kids that have you define it. Although eventually and inevitably they will, right?
Yes, at the end.
But if you think about family, if you think about consolidating family, well, then you have additional challenges and additional things to put into the mix, which are, for instance, hey, what language are we going to speak? What language are our children going to speak? We actually have some great psychologists here and even speech therapists who tell and explain here at CNews, how do we actually raise bilingual kids? That's a challenge, right? And which language are you going to choose to? Which kind of school are you going to send them to? Maybe that makes for differences. Maybe that makes that one culture more accentuated or is given more relevance to, and the other partner is like, so why not me, right? So you'll have to come to a mutual consensus on this. Another thing is, where am I going to live? Because if you choose to live at the country of origin of one of the two partners, that partner is inevitably going to have more advantage over you, going to be closer to the family, right? Can have languages, can have even be more used to the culture. Maybe sometimes this person needs to be an interpreter. This person needs to be a link even for social life of the kids too. So those are things you need to take into consideration. Also, the relationship you will have with your in-laws. That's usually a triggering point for couples in general, but in-laws, when it comes to mixed couples, even more so, because even if you have an international and flexible mind next to you as your partner, this does not necessarily mean that the parents have that same sort of cultural flexibility. If they have it, great for you, you know. I cherish that that's your reality. But if it's not, you will have to deal with a more inflexible or a more strict sort of like show of the culture that your partner is from. And that can be challenging. An additional thing I would name is transitions. How do you deal with births? How do you deal with becoming, older? Even death. There are specific rituals in a country, and actually, if you find this interesting, there is this great series in Netflix called From Scratch, where there is this Italian guy who meets an American lady who is there on an exchange program, and they decide to pursue their relationship. And you see sort of like the clashes. It's actually based, if I'm not incorrect, based on a true story even. And you see actually their clashes in terms not only their own, but their family specifically. And it can be quite painful because families deal with loyalties. They deal with habits and with customs which have a very highly symbolic and even emotional value. So if you choose to do different, you'll have to deal with, hey, I still belong to the family, but I might be different and I might do things differently. I still love you, and me not doing it exactly the way you hope me to do this does not mean I don't love you. Yet, that's a specific and complicated challenge.
No, actually it is. And here I'm coming up with another question about it. That is, how can you deal with those challenges? For example, before you were saying, okay, before we go there, we have to identify a few things. For example, can I live with this difference? But imagine that I say, yes, but I don't know how. So how can you deal with those challenges, with those things?
Well, one of it is already, what is your repertoire that you that you come from, right? So if you are open to influence, if you are fine with letting your partner maybe say, this is some of the things that we'll take into our house, this is some of the things that this is the way we will deal with our kids, and you're like, you know what, it's different to me, but I'm actually okay with it. And it's sort of like this thing of like, it does not necessarily need to be that my culture dictates what happens. Also, a curiosity, right? In the sense is like, okay, I do not think that I have my partner pinned down. Not working with stereotypes, right? Stereotypes can be fun. Humor would be a great strategy, you know?
Yeah.
Just making fun. You can use stereotypes in a fun way, you know, which maybe reduces a little bit of the tension. But those are particular skills that need to be taken into account. But if you talk about how can I deal with this, first of all, it's also becoming aware of what process you need to go through. So you need to be aware that you possibly need to acculturate to the culture of your spouse or your partner. And that this takes time, that you will find things very interesting, but other things are going to be very difficult to swallow, or you might even find annoying. Even some things that you initially liked are the differences that you later dislike. And it's sort of like looking at, hey, I like this at some point. So maybe I can still cherish what this is. And also becoming very mindful that sometimes a cultural difference does not mean that your partner is getting at you. It's just a different way of doing it. It's nothing personal, right? But it can become personal when you really start picking and pointing it out continually, because then you may be dealing with something that has an emotional value for your partner, making your partner actually turn defensive on you because, you know, there is not a welcoming to the difference. So it is celebrating the difference in some way, but also knowing maybe there are things that I need to give up. Maybe there are things that I would do differently, and that if I have chosen for this, then
I have to face it.
I have to face it. I have to face it. And that can be difficult. And I mean, if you get used to a different culture, that takes time, just as it does in the couple. So
it's a process, and you have to have that in mind, I guess.
Exactly. And we're not talking here about how you communicate or conflict management. That would be a challenge that non-mixed couples also have to face. There is this term called transnationalization, and this basically refers to how can I ground my identity, form significant relationships, and how can I live with the differences of two or more cultures. So can I make my home elsewhere? That will be one. That can be difficult, and maybe for one partner that is easier than it is for the other. Also, if you go to a different country, if it is a new country for both of you, this means that there's going to be more pressure on the couple. So you're going to have that role that maybe friendships and family, extended family has, which you don't. And specifically in the beginning, that puts more stress on the couple. And if you talk about, dynamics of, hey, how do we go about spending time together, time alone, shared versus individual, that is a particular challenge too. Again, just as you get used to the culture of your spouse, how do you get used to other cultures? What's your response to that? How open are you? So these are things that I think are particular challenges. It can also be how far you are away from your family, right? Who are we going to visit? When?
How many times?
Exactly. Frequency, because all these things have to do also with your possibilities, finances, and finances are another great thing to take into consideration, another hotspot for couples. And when it comes to mixed, well, it's requires more financially, unfortunately.
Of course.
Yeah.
And what scenarios might a mixed couple face in all these situations? Because I can imagine there can be many.
Exactly. And depending on the scenario that you're faced with, and this is something particular to mixed couples, one partner may have more of an advantage versus the other. So if you if you're an expat and you move because of work, that's one scenario. But if you are emigrating, that's quite a different one. If you are looking for a better future, if you have to leave your country of origin because of the political situation in the country, you come in the country a lot different, right? So that's one. Those are two that you can be faced with. The other one is, are we starting our relationship off online? Maybe I've only known you through social media, and then you need to match the words with the actions. And if you think about falling in love, you can have a very ideal image of someone when you are actually seeing them online. Imagine then starting to make a life together. It already is a challenge to move in together with someone, but if you go from online to later on moving in together because you finally can make it to live in a similar country, well...
So here you are talking about a very interesting point, which is about meeting someone online. And as we said at the beginning, now in this globalization world, and especially because of the internet, this is a more common thing.
That's right.
Every day. So what would you say that a person or two people who met online, how can they deal with that if they want to be in a relationship? Imagine that they live like separated by an ocean. And they don't have the resources to visit them.
Right.
What can they do for that?
Well, that's a very, I think it's a very difficult situation to start off with, right? I mean, there are limitations that can unfortunately not be bridged. And if you think about, if I'm actually going to get over the ocean and meet the other person, then whatever your experience may be in the short term of a couple of weeks maybe together, or maybe even 1 week, depends on what your job allows, right? Maybe you don't get the full picture. Maybe also some of the things become more pronounced in the sense there might be a partner that is more favorable towards social media, another one that is less favorable. You might also talk about how you deal with conflict and what is the frequency in which you talk. How do you go about resolving it? That online is also quite difficult, and maybe what you see online would be different if you met that actual person, if you met the person in person, face to face. So I think that inevitably, if you want to get a good glimpse, you will need to see the person face to face to match the words with the actual actions, with the actual evidence, and actually by what does it look like to spend time together, because there might be couples that have a great interaction online because there's a higher degree of independence, but then you need to go towards an actual interdependence once you actually start living together.
That's very interesting and important to have into consideration, because I mean, I don't know any case, but I've heard about some situations that they keep talking, or they keep they keep talking for months and months, but they don't see physically to each other, and then they have this idea, this ideal situation and this ideal relationship, and at the end, if they meet, or when they meet, this is not as they were expecting. So I think that is something important to have into consideration, because of course, at the online, by WhatsApp, by FaceTime, you can have a very good feeling and a lot of understanding, but then you have to go to the real proof, which is see in
exactly
person,
and you do not have the usual community or your friends or family that might know something of this person. Might be a complete stranger, so you have no connection points. And bringing it back to that initial phase of falling in love, what you have in common is your passion.
That's it. And I'm thinking about other scenario that you were talking about, which is, imagine that there are a couple and one is from France, so speaks French, and the other is from Germany and speaks German, but the person who speaks German also speaks French. So the common language is French, they talk in French,
Yes.
but it's not the mother language of the person B. Do you think at some point it's important that person E learns German? Or if they feel comfortable speaking in French, they can maintain that?
Well, I think that's a decision that they'll both need to reach, also by seeing how gifted a person can be in learning another language. Maybe for one, it comes easier just specifically by how that person is geared to learn a new language. Maybe for the other person that presents a difficulty. You also have to take into consideration the time that would take. So maybe it's interesting to be aware that if you actually have a language in which you both speak, the person who is German who ends up speaking French might not be so proficient in French as he or she is in German. So maybe even having a neutral language, like English could be, for maybe sometimes saying something in an easier way, could be a benefit. But this is, again, one of those things in which there is no clear answer. And maybe it's part also of accepting, okay, we are at a mismatch here. Because, I mean, yes, a partner could show willingness in learning a new language. But if you take, for example, myself, I'm trying to learn a little bit of Brazilian with my wife. And she's trying to learn some Dutch. It doesn't work the same way.
It's not the same,
Not the same
balance.
Exactly.
That is way more difficult than Portuguese. Yes. And especially if you speak Spanish. If you speak Spanish, Portuguese is quite easy.
Yes.
But yes. Okay, to go to an end, a mixed couple, as any couple, can have problems, difficulties, issues. And if they decide to go to couples therapy, can therapy take a universal approach that still manages to take into account cultural differences?
Yes. So I think that more than the type of therapy, although there are specific ones, it has to do with which are the components that they take into account. And there are a few things that seem, to a higher or lesser extent, to be universal. One of them is emotions. And emotions, a very famous researcher called Paul Ekman, in 2003, he did some groundbreaking research in which he came to prove that there are at least 6 basic universal emotions. And here we talk about fear, we talk about surprise, we talk about shame, and then anger, joy, and sadness. So how those emotions are expressed can vary from one culture to another. And the other thing that seems to be universal, or at least components of it, is attachment, the need for closeness, the need for comfort, the need for safety. And attachment, when you think about it, attachment actually was originally proposed by Bowlby as soon as 1969, and after 50 years, it's still like highly prevalent in academic research in the social sciences and the behavioral sciences. So it does show that this has been a particular focus, and that it's been giving a lot of relevance because it has a lot to say about relationships and how we connect with each other. Now, the early attachment has to do with how you relate to your caregiver, be it your parents, but it doesn't necessarily have to be your parent. It's someone who is taking care of you on a consistent basis. Right, and here you can have differences, even culturally speaking, in which you are. If you take an individualistic society, as Western is, well, then you might think about parents specifically. Although, again, it can not be the case. But if you think about other cultures where it's more collective, more persons can actually maybe represent that role. But the interesting thing is that this early attachment of how a baby or a toddler relates to the caregiver and expects the caregiver to be there, and becomes maybe anxious or worried once the caregiver is no longer there. It's like, where did mama go, right? I mean, the world is not a safe place because I don't see where mommy is, right? Well, it seems that later on there have been different researchers who have suggested that this actually might extrapolate to how we actually deal with our romantic partners in the way that they reenact and they sort of like show a similar way of relating to us, and they can birth in us those sense of feeling connected or disconnected, feeling safe versus feeling unstable. Adults have that same, and specifically romantic partners seem to reenact some of that early attachment that we had. And if you think about attachment, the way it works also in adulthood, it has to do with how do I express my desires for closeness, but also for autonomy, to have my own time, my separate space. It has to do with how can I tell my partner when I am feeling vulnerable, when I am feeling exposed? How can I tell my partner about things that I wish? So it has to do, attachment in adulthood has a lot to do with how do I express my dreams, my desires, my needs, and my emotions. And actually the language that the transmission of needs has are emotions. So these are closely intertwined.
Okay. And I think you had a personal anecdote related to this that you realized something important, right?
Exactly. And although we talk about universals, it does not mean that these universals are particularly expressed. And there are differences in what is okay to be expressed in terms of emotions, how you actually express your desires, and also your family ties, which also have to do with sort of like a cultural transmission of how do you cope and how do you regulate emotions. So when I was just a young fella of 19 years old, I went to India and I stayed there for around 6 months. And I was part of a community there. And I had, had a disagreement with a colleague. And I thought that I was going to be like, I'm going to own it. I'm going to take responsibility. And I'm going to tell in front of the community how, I was wrong. So we have this gathering and I was like, hey, sorry, can I say something? I just wanted to say I'm really sorry because I had this issue with this person and I just wanted to openly take responsibility for it. And funnily enough, not the person that I had the issue with, but others came to me and was like, no, but why would you do that? Why would you share that openly? No, you don't do that. And there is this, there was a difference in making such a problem public, right? Maybe it was shameful to present it that way. And for me, that was part of my culture shock in which I was like, but I'm trying to do it good here. I'm taking a vulnerable place here. And apparently that was not a good course of action. So just as an example of how in different cultures, different things may be okay versus not okay. And I think that's also for therapists, we need to take into account that there can be differences in the way that needs are expressed and also how one goes about particular emotions. And I think that's the mix that we need to work with. Universal would be a meta-narrative, right? Like you try to get a narrative that explains like global realities. But in that, we cannot miss the micro-narratives, which are the individual expressions and also cultural expressions for that matter.
Very important to have into consideration. That's completely right. And to finish, is there any therapy that takes the aforementioned components into account specifically?
Yes, there is. And it actually has been a therapy that's been translated into Chinese and Korean for that matter, and even Spanish too. But this is called emotion or emotionally focused therapy, which has been introduced by Susan or Sue Johnson and Greenberg. And they work with attachment and emotions. They look at how you can become a safe place for your partner, a safe place where you can openly share about your needs, your desires, and to attune to them, understand them, not shy away from them, not turn away from them. Because a lot of times you may have partners that once somebody does not reply, because maybe the person does not know what to say at that moment, it's not like, something is wrong with the relationship. Oh, he didn't reply in a few hours. This is bad, right? This has to do with, can I see a safe place in you? Can you become that safe place for me? And becoming vulnerable, exposing oneself can be very challenging. And if you do not see characteristics in your spouse or partner that would help it, or actually if you feel the need to become defensive, that's a circumstance that will make it more difficult. But yes, this is a specific model because they work with these two components, what we just discussed, could have a universal component to it. It's particularly interesting to work with, and it's something that I partially use because I'm an integrative therapist. I use different therapeutic models, both for seeing patients on a individual level, but then also when I see couples. And I think that's enriching. So yes, that's the one that by incorporating these two elements could be seen as a type of therapy that can be culturally relevant.
Great. Before we finish, is there something you would like to add or to say to
Well,
close this episode?
Well, just to say that I think I mentioned Brazilian before, and you said Portuguese. It's actually Portuguese, and I remember the first time that I was talking to my current spouse, and I was like, "Yeah, oh, so you speak Brazilian?" It's like, "No, I mean I speak Portuguese. Maybe it's Brazilian Portuguese, which is different. It's different."
It is.
Yes.
It's like Spanish. Spanish is not the same as Spanish of Spain
Exactly.
than the Argentina, Venezuela, whatever, Mexico.
Exactly. So I keep on messing it up. What can I say?
You are still learning.
I'm still learning.
We are all learning in this process. We are still on the faces on the stage.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for all this valuable information, for all your will and for all your work, because I think this can help a lot of people and especially a lot of mixed couples. And well, if you have a mixed couple or if you think Daniel can help you, don't hesitate to ask for an appointment with him through Senius, because as you can see, he's not only an expert on the field, but he's also a mixed couple himself. He has a Brazilian partner, so he will be the perfect person to help you with any issues or problems that you might have.
Thank you.